Good morning, everybody. Apologies for the slight delayed start. As is always the case, we're having some technical issues, but hopefully we are now over that. So as I say, morning and welcome to Bytes Security Partnerships, the Shape of Advanced Threats 2018 webinar. My name's Graham Williams. I'm one of the sales managers at Bytes, and I will be doing the introduction to the webinar before handing over to some of the guys at Checkpoint to talk you through some of the more interesting bits. Hopefully you can all see my screen. So just moving forward onto the agenda, we'll start with who Bytes are. I appreciate a lot of you have probably heard it before, so I will try and rush through it. Then we're going to go into a bit around the change in threat landscape before I hand over to our guest speakers, Tish and Maya. They're going to talk you through some of the lessons of 2017, why it's been a great year for hackers, some of the trends that we've seen over the last 12 months and the impact it's had on yourselves and other customers around the world. And then we're going to move into the 2018 predictions. So the guys are going to talk you through what they're predicting is going to be the next main challenge for yourselves, and how they can potentially go about helping you mitigate that threat and help you provide a more solid platform for your users. We will then go into a Q&A session. All questions that you type into the questions box, we'll try and get across to the guys, and hopefully they'll be able to provide you with some insightful answers. So slight bit of housekeeping. As you probably can tell, everybody's line is on mute. It'll just be the presenters that are able to talk to everybody. Like I say, Q&A will be at the end. This Q&A is designed to be questions that are strategic or technical questions. They're not commercial questions. So if you have any questions that are going to be commercially led, please reach out to us separately and we can get your account manager in touch with you to try and answer those questions at a later date. The recording will be available for everybody. So if you want to watch it again, or if you think it would be particularly useful to any of your colleagues, then the recording will be available and it will be sent to everybody following the conclusion of the webinar. And finally, we will be doing a feedback survey at the end. These are really important to us as Bytes and both Checkpoint to get a feel for how relevant you guys thought the webinar was, areas that you think we could improve, and things that were particularly useful for yourselves. So housekeeping done, we'll move on to the opening slides, I guess. Like I say, some of you have probably seen some of this before, especially if you've worked with Bytes over the past few years. But essentially what we offer, so we are a specialist IT security reseller. So all we do is pure play security, and we have done for a long time. We're part of the multi-million-pound Bytes Ultron group, which enables us to talk to you as part of a very big organization and a company that's very stable financially and in terms of its global footprint. So you can rest assured that we're a company that is solid financially and one that isn't going anywhere. But what we also offer is that small niche company that is able to really work with you around your requirements and be very agile to adapt to the market trends and also what our customers need. We work with a lot of top tier vendors, the likes of Checkpoint, and we generally hold the top tier accreditation with those guys. The one in the middle, the in-house consultancy, is probably the main selling point for Bytes, and those of you that have worked with us in the past will be able to testify to that. We run an in-house support function that is a direct-to-engineer support. So the whole point behind that is getting you guys back to doing a job in a timely fashion. So you're straight through to an engineer that is going to be able to help you on a first call basis rather than having to hand it off. So that's a very high level of who we are and what we do. And as you move into the next slide, you'll see some of the areas that we cover. Now, those of you that have worked with us for a long time will know that we've traditionally played in this network security, this perimeter area. We've got a very strong presence with the likes of Checkpoint and have done for a long time. But as the market's changed, as the threats that you guys are seeing have changed, we really had to move with the times as well. Hence, you can now see some more areas on there than you probably were able to a few years ago. So obviously, the likes of Checkpoint in the firewall arena, and obviously Checkpoint moves through to the endpoint and things like that as well. But we also cover everything from content security, data security, all the way down to remote access strategies, and moving forward into things like insider threats, CASB, that sort of things as well. So the message to take away is essentially that Bytes can help you with any of your security needs. And if there's anything outside of what we covered today that you want to talk about, please do feel free to get in touch and we'll be more than happy to help. This slide just really covers off the end-to-end nature in what Bytes can offer. The key takeaways from this is that Bytes have the ability to essentially take you from the inception of a project all the way through to completion and ongoing support. We do that through our in-house support team, who can help scope a project and scope any kit that might be required. We can then help you install it, design the network around it, and then provide the ongoing support, training, and knowledge transfers that you might need. And then tie that in with regular account reviews and market updates and seminars such as today. And hopefully you start to get the idea around the bigger picture that Bytes are potentially bringing to your organization. So what brings us here today is essentially a challenging threat landscape. As we've seen through numerous high-profile cases that are now front-page news, ransomware is paying off. It's hitting high-profile targets that is really causing people at boardroom level to stand up and take note. What we've really seen over recent times is that new exploits are coming from old vulnerabilities, things that have laid there unnoticed for a while. And as we sort of start to move through the year, I'm sure we'll see more and more old vulnerabilities that are being exploited. And as a result, we have obviously seen the volume and impact of these attacks increasing. And it's something that we really need to get to grips with. At the risk of annoying a few people, we have obviously got GDPR coming up as well. Now, I'm sure, like the rest of you, you can't wait for it to be here and we can finally get a grip on what it's going to look like. But what we do know is that this is something that isn't going away, and we need to adapt as companies and security professionals to the legislation that's coming. So to do that, we need to understand some of the latest tools that are being deployed by attackers. We need to understand their tactics, and we need to understand what is being done by the likes of Checkpoint and other security vendors to protect ourselves from it. So with that, we've obviously got today, and we've got this webinar with Checkpoint. So I'm sure Checkpoint needs no introduction for a lot of you, but for those of you that aren't so familiar, Checkpoint are a market leader in threat prevention and threat research. They, like I said earlier, have traditionally started in the gateway market, but have now moved into looking at the advanced malware market and looking how to protect your guys against such threats. Bytes have been a top tier partner with Checkpoint for over 5 years now. We've got a very strong relationship with those guys. So hopefully today we're going to share some insight with you into what that threat landscape looks like and what the guys can offer. So I think first we're going to pass over to Tish, or Aatish. Tish is the head of Sandblast and threat prevention at Checkpoint, and Tish is going to talk you through the next part of the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham. So just to introduce myself and Checkpoint, hopefully everybody can see my screen. As Graham said, Aatish Pattni, I head up our threat prevention technologies for Checkpoint for Northern Europe, so UK and Ireland. With me on the line, I have Maya Horowitz, who's the head of our Threat Operations Center. It's important to note that Checkpoint as a vendor has very much evolved over the last 25 years, and particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, we've gone for a bit of an internal revolution, actually. Today, Checkpoint is not just about cybersecurity technologies, but actually, when I look at the team that Maya runs and the R&D function, where we have approximately 500 people dedicated just to threat research, we're actually one of the most active forces in researching the latest trends in terms of malware, in terms of advanced threats, what we see as the next vectors. When we look at things like mobile threat, for example, Google recently in their last security report actually attributed 70% of the malware found on mobile devices last year to Checkpoint research. So as well as our technology set and our strong kind of ethos of providing enforcement technology to customers, we have a threat operations center run by Maya that focuses on, what's the next threat vector, what's the next vulnerability. When we look at attacks, mass attacks like WannaCry, that same function is immediately involved post-attack to actually dissect an attack in order to understand the indicators of compromise and to immediately look at resolution steps, which then brings us on to another side of Checkpoint's organization, which is our incident response function. Incident response is an independent function within Checkpoint that does not care about what technology you use. Their sole focus is you as an organization in a cyber breach being able to help you diagnose the attack and to triage the attack and get your business back online. So between our technology, our incident response, and our threat operations center, we have a very rounded view of the threat landscape. And what I'm going to present to you today is actually a sample of a recent keynote speech that our CEO Gil Shwed gave at our Checkpoint experience in Barcelona 2 weeks ago, which really highlights the threats that we've seen in the last year and what we're really predicting for the year ahead. And from there, we'll then move into some of the security technologies that Checkpoint offers to actually address some of these threats, and more specifically the challenges that the threats create, namely, managing the complexity of a disparate security estate. So we've all seen the headlines. We know that with 2017 there were some big attacks, particularly WannaCry and NotPetya. But I think one thing that's been missed is actually 2017 was a real wake-up call when it comes to cybersecurity. Graham talked earlier about the fact that today C-level within organizations recognize the impact of ransomware because of some of these mass attacks that we've seen. And just last week, or the week before last rather, the World Economic Forum released their latest global report on risk. Nothing to do with cybersecurity, but their risk report of the top risks that we are likely to see in 2018. And you can see on that table that, bottom to the top, they measure the impact of risk, and left to right, the likelihood of a risk. And if we look at that top right quadrant where we have high impact risks with a high likelihood, what we actually see for the first time in history is that cyber attacks are predicted now to be as big a risk to the world as extreme weather events, natural disasters, and the effects of climate change. In fact, if you actually look at it, cyber attacks are now predicted to be a larger risk factor than terrorist attacks to nations and states. When we actually look at the top five, we can see that this is a trend that started in 2017 with mass incidents of data theft and fraud. But actually, the prediction is very much that 2018 we'll continue to see data fraud as the fourth biggest global risk, but cyber attacks themselves will be the third biggest risk, bigger than the actual data theft itself. And when we look at this, we really feel that we're actually at an inflection point now in the evolution of threats. And we need to recognize the types of threats that we're seeing in order to look at how we protect against these threats. So we had some, generation one in the 90s of viruses. We evolved to network-based attacks, to application-based attacks. And in recent years, we've seen malicious payloads inside documents and executables. And today, we now move into the realms of the mega attack. And when we look at these mass attacks, the phrase that is being used in the industry today is that of a mega attack, something that is going to attack on a nation state or an industrial scale. And if we look at the types of attacks and we measure the types of protections that we have against those attacks, it actually presents an alarming view. If we look at the first generation viruses that were out there since the late 80s, we have antivirus as a technology set that's commonly deployed to protect against it. We then look at the second generation of attacks, so the network-based attacks from the 90s. That's where the introduction of firewall technology came into the world. And then we look at the application attacks of the early 2000s. It's when we started to look at intrusion detection and prevention technologies. And the latter attacks of polymorphic content or embedded content in documents and executables bore the rise of sandboxing technologies, command and control prevention technologies. When we actually look at some of our research, not only of the threats, but actually at deployment in the customer base of technology to protect, we actually see a really alarming trend develop. It's clear that 100% of organizations deploy protection against viruses. There's a trend of looking at next generation AV at the moment, but the general concept is that we have antivirus. Similarly, when we look at firewall technology, 100% of businesses do deploy a firewall of some sort. When we start to get to Gen 3, so the early 2000s attacks, suddenly the deployment rate of technology, regardless of vendor, drops significantly. And only 50% of organizations globally actually deploy an intrusion prevention system. When we look at the polymorphic content of the last 10 years, it's even worse. Less than 10%, in fact, 7% of organizations globally report to have some form of sandboxing or advanced analytics technology in place within their network. So if we look at the generations of protection, we can see that the generation of protection has not kept up with the generation of threats. In fact, if we were to give ourselves a grading on a protection scale, globally we're somewhere between Gen 2 and Gen 3 attacks is what we're able to confidently protect against. So we're seeing Gen 5 attacks, but actually the technology set that we all deploy globally is barely getting to Generation 3. And actually that's why we've seen such a rise in attacks, because the attackers know the types of technology we deploy, and they're exploiting the blind spots and the big open gaps that we're leaving across organizations. And if you look at what Gen 5 attacks are really about, they're very much focused. What we think we're going to see more of this year is large-scale attacks that affect either an industry, a country, maybe specific organizations. But by and large, they're going to be large-scale mass attacks. If you look at WannaCry and NotPetya particularly, they piggybacked off of nation-state grade attack vectors. And what we also see is that the attack is changing. It's no longer just about trying to get into the front door of an organization. Today, these attacks are true multi-vector attacks. They don't just attack the network, but they attack the cloud environment, whether it's your infrastructure in the cloud or your software applications in the cloud. And they often now use mobile devices as an attack vector and as an entry point into the organization. What we're also seeing is a rise in state-sponsored technology being used in these attacks. It doesn't necessarily mean that the attacks themselves are state-sponsored, but rather the technology used is actually state-sponsored in origin. In the case of both NotPetya and WannaCry, we saw that it was actually the Eternal Blue vulnerability, or the Eternal Blue exploit to the SMB vulnerability, that was actually the mass attack vector. And the Eternal Blue exploit was actually something that was created at a nation-state level in America. So you can see that these very, very sophisticated attack vectors that are created by nation states with high levels of resources, high levels of funding and knowledge and insight, as they're accidentally leaked out to the wide world, become accessible to cyber criminals. And cyber criminals are able to reuse those to mass effect. In some cases, we do see evidence of state-sponsored cybercrime as well. There's evidence that, whilst it's not proven, there is evidence that suggests NotPetya was part of a nation-state attack, largely because it focused on Ukraine as a country. But again, these are some of the things that we are going to see. I can see a couple of questions just popping in. What we'll do is answer the questions towards the end of the Q&A side. If you do have any other questions about this presentation, please do continue to pop those questions in the chat to Graham or myself, and then Graham will read them out at the end and Maya and I will be able to answer them. So we see Gen 5 attacks as being the next attack vector. It is clear we are going to see more mass attacks. And whilst we're at Gen 2 to 3 technology, I personally spend a lot of time talking to organizations about sandboxing and advanced threat prevention of polymorphic content. And what I see when I look at the deployments that do exist is that they're not enough. Sandboxing on its own as a concept is not effective at preventing these mass cyber attacks. Neither is machine learning or artificial intelligence. You need a combination of factors. And what we really see for the next phase of attacks is that we have to move to a prevention state. At the moment, too many organizations focus on detection capabilities as opposed to prevention capabilities. Detection worked when you were faced with a small scale attack, an attack that was in isolation to your organization, and an attack that executed over a period of time. You could detect the attack, understand the attack, and defend against it before the payload took effect. However, today we see attacks, as we said, on a mass scale that affect immediately, and they attack within seconds, and the damage is already done at the initial phase. So we do need to have a prevention capability to defend the organization from those attacks immediately. And as I said, it needs to be real time, not 5 minutes later, not 2 hours later. But as we look at where our networks are heading, as we become more cloudified and we embrace the move to public, private, or hybrid cloud, as we embrace the move to SaaS applications like Office 365 over traditional email, we need to start embracing prevention capabilities that will address not just today's network and today's operation, but the future state that we're moving to at a rapid pace. And that includes mobile. I'm talking to, I talk to various organizations, and more I'm seeing organizations that don't, new organizations that don't deploy a traditional data center, don't issue out laptops. And in fact, a lot of their strategy for technology consumption is to issue their staff with mobile phones and to run cloud-based applications. And their staff can use either mobiles or tablets to access those cloud-based applications in order to perform their work. So we have to address those security challenges. And if I look at the technologies that are out there in the industry, if I look at the technology that Checkpoint provides, there's a lot out there. But if I look at whether it's Checkpoint or other vendor, there are a plethora of technologies that are available that can be deployed in a prevention capability to give you that holistic protection that you need. However, as this slide clearly shows, there's too much technology. In fact, there's actually too much complexity because of deploying all of this technology. And as big a challenge as we see with cyber attacks and mass attacks being the next attack vector, one of the biggest challenges is how do you actually deploy technology at a pace that can allow you to keep up? I think that gap that we see between threats and technology is not through naivety from organizations. I'm sure everyone on this call would testify to the fact that they want to deploy, more protection capabilities within their business, but it's simply not possible at times. And when we actually look at why are we at Gen 2.8 in terms of protection, we've actually, gone out and surveyed, our customer base. Checkpoint, to give you an idea, has over 150,000 customers globally. And when we regularly survey our customers and speak with CIOs in large organizations, we see a number of recurring themes. I think prior to last year's mass attacks, there was definitely an attitude that said, it'll happen to somebody else, it won't happen to me. And that was a challenge that a lot of people did mention. We also see with that plethora of technologies, the deployment of all these protection technologies is complicated. And actually, the more technology you have from disparate vendors, the more, whilst you can have overlap in some areas, you actually get blind spots in other areas. And there's, as we talked about detection versus prevention, there's definitely a philosophy out there in the industry that says there's no way to stop attacks, so we have to, we actually have to move to detection state. And I think what that actually talks to is the global marketing that the security industry has done around detection capabilities, rather than focusing on the protection capabilities that do exist within the industry. And I think it's quite valid that, it's actually a comment I had recently from a CISO of a large multinational bank that said, it takes me typically 6 months to deploy a technology. If I look at deploying 20 advanced threat technologies within my estate, it will take me till 2025 before I actually have everything deployed. By that time, those deployments are relevant because we'll be at Gen 7, 8, or 9. And I think it's a very fair point. It is a challenge that we face, that security is often like painting the fourth bridge. By the time we finish, it's time to restart the painting process again. And all of this basically creates a scenario where it looks impossible to prevent these next-gen attacks. The reality is that not just Checkpoint, but the industry has moved on quite considerably when we look at advanced threat prevention. And those impossible challenges are addressable today. They're things that we can do immediately. There will be new challenges that come around the corner that we'll have to respond to. But when I look at the fifth generation of cyber attacks that we're talking about, Checkpoint is able to prevent those fifth generation attacks from impacting customers. There are other organizations out there that are actually able to sell a similar story of prevention, but it seems that we don't want to deploy those prevention capabilities. And what we're really talking about is it's time to almost leapfrog to a certain degree the Gen 3 and the Gen 4 technologies to really start looking at the fifth generation of cyber prevention, because in the fifth generation, vendors have really taken, and particularly Checkpoint, we've taken the technology sets, we've taken the challenges, and we've actually engineered solutions that address the complexity challenge as well as the security effectiveness challenge. Our strategy with our Sandblast technology, particularly, is to focus on three things and to automate the function of these three things, that you don't actually have to spend time tuning, configuring, monitoring. Actually, utilize the intelligence that my team and our incident response team create by leveraging the technology that sits in front of those human resources. So what we really focus on is, number one, how can we prevent attacks in real time from entering your organization? Number two, if an attack does get through an unprotected vector, what can we do to contain it and to immediately isolate that attack? And then number three, how can we immediately learn from that so that we can self-tune the system, self-tune the ecosystem so that you're protected elsewhere? How do we stop that breach turning into an epidemic by immediately containing what we see? If I look at the prevention side of things, there are three core functions that we perform from a prevention side in real time. Number one, for any malicious payloads coming in documents, we immediately reconstruct the document into a brand new safe version that doesn't contain any payload. And it takes place within seconds, so the end user is not disrupted. We don't detect, we immediately just prevent payload access to the end user without disrupting the end user. Secondly, through a mixture of sandboxing, machine learning, and 28 other engines, we actually block, we examine the content to block unknown and zero-day malware. And the third part of our prevention strategy is to actually look at outbound. Let's look at the potential for credential loss, be it from a spear phishing attack on a mobile phone, or somebody clicking on a link and then uploading credentials to a third-party phishing site. Let's block the outbound. If I look at that first piece of document sanitization, we have a technology that's deployable in all of our Sandblast capabilities called threat extraction. Threat extraction takes any document that comes into the organization, strips any active code, and passes a brand new version of that document in the correct file format with the correct data to the end user within approximately 4 seconds. No disruption to the end user, whether it's on email, web, a download, a file off a USB stick. We can immediately perform threat extraction on documents so that documents are no longer used as a payload vector and your business is safe from malicious content. If we look at ransomware attacks particularly, quite often we see ransomware is actually embedded as a macro within a Word document or an Excel, and the attackers are relying on the end user clicking enable content to trigger that payload or to trigger the callback to get the full payload. Threat extraction eliminates that process within seconds. Simultaneously, our threat emulation engine, which did start as a sandbox but has since evolved, examines that payload. So whilst we give the end user the clean file, we simultaneously examine that active content within a document or an executable to ensure that it isn't actually malicious. Threat emulation consists of 28 different engines. We have machine learning engines for macros, for executables. We have behavior analytics engines. We have an operating system sandbox, and we also have a unique CPU level emulation engine, which actually looks at the CPU stack inside our processors in our sandboxing environment to actually look for shellcode execution, which often we see as the pre-staging of sophisticated, attacks, particularly attacks that are designed to evade a sandbox. If you look at some of the recent notes about Spectre and Meltdown, the Intel vulnerabilities, we're really seeing that the CPU is becoming a new attack surface for the attackers, and it's important that we can actually prevent those sorts of attacks by actually examining the CPU stack and seeing what's in there. So that's the threat emulation technology. Over the 28 engines, we consistently add new engines. In fact, we're adding a new engine shortly to provide machine learning across all of our engines to provide better context to attacks. And then the third prevention technology we have is our zero phishing capability, whether it's through browser experience, through our laptops, through mobile phones with text message based SMS phishing or chat phishing attacks. What we want to do is ensure that end users do not upload any credentials and data to illegitimate sites. So very simply, very simply, what we do is when an end user clicks on a link, we examine that link from a behavioral perspective, from a reputation perspective, to ensure that it's not a known malicious site. But we also then examine the actual page that somebody's visiting. We perform behavior analytics in a few seconds on that page. We still let the end user go to the page so that they're not disrupted from their experience, but we don't let them upload any content to that page until we've deemed that page is actually safe. Again, requires no involvement from the end user, requires no administration from your perspective. These three prevention technologies simply work in the background with a rich end user experience, but still maximizing the prevention capabilities. Now, depending on where you deployed those prevention capabilities, i.e. network, cloud, endpoint, there could be gaps in the network, depending on how well you cover the estate. And what we then need is a containment strategy for those gaps. From a containment perspective, we focus on three fundamental things. Number one, stop the outbound callback, stop the CNC traffic and the call home of any malware back to a threat actor. Number two, in the case of ransomware, we want to immediately kill the ransomware process so that it doesn't spread laterally and it stops encrypting files on your machine. And number three, for the files that have been encrypted, we want to provide an automatic restoration capability that means that the end user gets their files back within seconds without having to pay out any ransoms. So if we look at the command and control callback perspective, on any endpoint on our perimeter technology or on mobile devices, we have a constant feed back to our ThreatCloud. ThreatCloud is Checkpoint's intelligence database that's available globally for all Checkpoint customers. You can also add external feeds into ThreatCloud that are industry specific. You might have purchased external feeds like Insights to do deep and dark web monitoring as an example. We're constantly looking for any activity that triggers against ThreatCloud. And when we see outbound bot traffic or CNC traffic, in the case of an endpoint or a perimeter, we immediately block that traffic. In the case of endpoints, we're actually able to immediately lock down the endpoint to kill that process that actually triggered the CNC traffic. So not only are we stopping the north-south communication, we're actually also able at this point to stop any east-west communication from that process or application to stop malware spreading laterally across your network. In the case of WannaCry, this was very effective for organizations that deployed our technology because it meant that if a machine was infected because of the SMB vulnerability, that infection did not spread laterally across their network, and they were not then an attack vector to spread the mass attack globally either. We talked about ransomware prevention and rollback of files. we have an offline engine built into our endpoint capability that constantly monitors for ransomware behavior. So it's not just dependent on our threat emulation technology that does analysis. It is looking for specific behaviors of ransomware. In the case of NotPetya, we had no signatures in place, and the same with WannaCry, but we detected behavior that looked like ransomware, and we're able to immediately kill that process. That engine, whilst also providing behavioral analysis, takes snapshots of any data that an application is trying to access. So before any application can get access to a data file, we first have a low-level driver on the device that has access to that data file, and then actually passes on access to the application, which means that we can take a snapshot of that data before the application does anything to it. So if ransomware is detected, we analyze it, we immediately produce a forensics report, which I'll come on to. We quarantine it by killing the process using anti-bot. So we destroy that ransomware on that machine. And then we automatically look at all of the files that it had accessed moments before it was detected. Each file, bear in mind, we took a backup of, and we automatically restore those files to their pre-encrypted state. All of this occurs within a matter of minutes without any disruption to the end users. Going back to those mass attacks, being able to detect them automatically at the network or at the endpoint, kill as much of that attack coming in, but then whatever does get in, having this sort of process on the endpoint to automatically remediate the endpoint from the damage is vital. The third line of defense that we focus on is our ability to analyze and understand the attack. Quite often I see that the first 48 hours of any cyber incident are the most critical. That's when you need to do all of your understanding in order to do effective triage and response. And I think in crisis management globally, there's a concept of the golden 48 hours. Typically, a cyber attack, in most cyber attacks, organizations report that it takes them between 4 and 5 days to understand the attack. So if the golden 48 hours are the most critical, and we're at 4 or 5 days, we're already out of that effective window when we try and move into a remediation point. So our view is, let's understand the incident immediately. Let's understand that root cause within seconds. Let's automate that incident understanding process. Some organizations can afford to invest in their own cyber operations center, their own threat research and malware research. They can hire specialist security analysts. That's not every organization. So for the organizations that cannot afford to invest in the manpower resources to analyze an attack and have those skills in-house, you need technology that will provide you with the answers, and you need to be able to leverage what vendors like Checkpoint can do with our threat research. And that's where our forensics technology comes in. So we're constantly, again, using the same engine that's monitoring behavior for ransomware. We're also collecting metadata on the endpoint. We take no more than a gig of storage off the hard drive locally to do this. And typically for a gig of storage, we're able to collect 90 days worth of metadata on a particular endpoint. When we see a cyber incident occur, and that cyber incident could be triggered either by any one of the Checkpoint technology we've already described, or even a third-party AV or third-party network access control technology, we immediately look at that database of that metadata. We analyze it ourselves using the technology. We run our own algorithms to really find the signal from the noise and to tune everything out. There are other technologies in the marketplace that offer a similar capability, but typically I find that you still have to do 2 days worth of analysis of the logs that they generate. With Checkpoint, within, again, a few minutes, we've actually analyzed all of that database and said, here are the relevant pieces of information. And we automatically produce a report that's fed up to your existing Checkpoint Smart Event ecosystem. If you're not a Checkpoint customer and you don't have Smart Event, the report is still available locally on the machine. And here's a sample of a report that we would produce within minutes of an attack affecting a machine. So we'd provide you with an immediate analysis of what suspicious activity we saw. We've really focused on making sure that this report is human readable. I don't mean any disrespect to any security analysts on the call, but we want to make sure that it's available and it's understandable to organizations that don't have their own in-house security analysis skill. This report is actually an example of mobile malware we found for Pokemon Go the year before last. Within minutes of seeing it, we're able to then see what it did when it hit an endpoint. So we show you what the suspicious activity is. We show you the potential business impact. So if there were documents that were actually affected, leaked, deleted, encrypted, we can show you what they are. We also then provide you with the remediation steps. So what are the changes that you now need to make to this endpoint in order to clean it up? We do have a capability to do automatic remediation, but the key function here is actually to provide you with the instant understanding so that you can make decisions about remediation, bearing in mind that remediation does have an impact on the business. And we provide you with a complete attack flow and a visualization that shows you how this attack got in and what the entry point was, which, the entry point could have been days, weeks in advance of the attack. So being able to actually trace back to that entry point gives you all of the indicators of compromise to then search the rest of your ecosystem to look for not just the attack, but potential indicators of compromise that show future potential attack vectors within the organization. So everything that we've described, the extraction, zero phishing, threat emulation, our forensics and anti-ransomware, and anti-bot, are technologies that are available under the Sandbar Solutions suite and the Sandbar umbrella. Today, you can consume various parts of these technologies on your network perimeter. If you're an existing Checkpoint customer, you can actually add emulation and extraction into your existing Checkpoint gateways very, very quickly to protect against the email and web vectors. We also provide dedicated technology for non-Checkpoint customers or for customers that don't want to use our cloud-based emulation. As we talked about, we provide an endpoint agent that's deployable, whether you're a Checkpoint customer or not, to provide extraction, phishing, emulation, forensics, and anti-ransomware. We've just recently moved the extraction, emulation, and zero phishing and anti-bot into cloud-based applications. We started with Office 365, but today we can actually extend that out to any common cloud application from G Suite to SharePoint to Salesforce to Workday, you name it. We also provide CASB capability within that with DLP. And we also provide a unique account takeover prevention capability for SaaS applications. So we can actually look for compromised credentials accessing your SaaS applications, and as a result, prevent things like whaling attacks, where people try and, compromise your network through a SaaS application or create fraudulent activity by getting access to your SaaS-based email. All of these technologies are also consumable via an API if you want to integrate with your custom applications. And as I talked about with emulation and phishing and extraction, they're also available in a specific mobile format for organizations wanting to look at securing mobile devices, be they Android, Apple, BYOD, or corporately owned, from things like rogue network access, man-in-the-middle attacks, Bluetooth hijacks, malicious apps being downloaded, or even in severe cases things like SS7 attacks to surveillance. So all of this technology is consumable in a wide architecture. The key thing is that you don't have to spend time trying to configure these technologies. You simply make choices of where you want to enforce the technologies, and it's Checkpoint intelligence in the background that's powering these technologies and constantly keeping them ahead of the threat vectors that we see. All of this is essentially managed using Checkpoint's R80.10 Unified Management Console. So you have one look and feel, regardless of what the enforcement point is, regardless of whether it's in your network or in a private or public cloud, doesn't matter. One look and feel to manage the policy for all of these technologies to, again, reduce the complexity and to avoid blind spots in your configuration. We talked about Smart Event earlier. We ensure that all of our technology, again, is reported and correlated through a single reporting engine so that you're not getting disparate reports, but actually you get to see the complete picture and an attack profile as opposed to looking at individual incidents in isolation. It is effectively a SIEM technology for the Checkpoint ecosystem, but that Smart Event technology can also feed into an existing SIEM technology that you deploy so that you can leverage our intelligence with broader network intelligence as well. Just a word on Sandbar technology and independent testing. NSS Labs for the last 3 years have performed a breach detection test and a breach prevention test this year. In terms of breach detection, we've consistently scored as one of the highest vendors. When it comes to breach prevention, the new report that came out just 2 months ago, Checkpoint scored the highest in terms of prevention capabilities with the lowest TCO in the industry. And it was recognized that by NSS Labs that we're leaps and bounds ahead of the industry when it comes to offering real-time prevention capabilities that don't disrupt your organization. So just to summarize, appreciate there's a lot of content. We focus on protecting all of those surfaces from various different attack vectors with our Sandblast technology. It's focused on prevention capabilities, containment capabilities, and automated analysis technology capabilities. And the reason it's important is because we are at a true inflection point now in terms of the types of attacks that we're seeing. We're seeing that our protections aren't keeping up with the attacks, and we need to do something different. And that's really the approach for Checkpoint. Is how can we automate that protection capability? How can you leverage our intelligence to protect your organization? And as I said, it's using these three fundamentals of prevention, containment, and analysis. I think it's just repeating the same slide, apologies. That's it from me. My contact details are available, but I'd like to open it up to Q&A. So back over to you, Graham.
Thanks, Tish. Apologies on a few technical issues there again. At the minute, we haven't had any questions from anybody. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to use the questions box that's on the WebEx. Other than that, we're going to sort of have nothing else to talk about. I'll give it a couple of seconds there for anybody to type in any questions quickly if you've got any. Obviously, if there's any questions that anybody wants to add at a later date, or they sort of come to mind as soon as we wrap up here, as Tish said, his details are on the screen in front of you there. You should all have the details of your Bytes account manager, or if not, please feel free to reach out to Shona or myself, and we will point you in the right direction. It doesn't look like we've got anyone asking any questions, Tish, so unless you've got anything else to add there. Oh, hang on, we've got one just pop up.
Okay.
It says, can Sandblast be deployed without the endpoint features?
Yes, all of the Sandblast capabilities I showed in terms of network, endpoint, API cloud, mobile, etc., can all be deployed in isolation. So you don't have to have Sandblast for endpoint to run Sandblast for network, and vice versa. You can choose to consume it where you see fit.
Fantastic. Edwin, hopefully that answers your question. And if you want any follow-up on that, do let us know. Unless there's anyone else that's got any questions, we shall leave you all to shoot off. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us this morning, and thank you to Tish for presenting. Like I say, if anyone has any questions that come to mind afterwards, please feel free to reach out. And if not, then I'm sure your account manager will be in touch with you very shortly. But thanks again for your presence today, and we hopefully will see you at one of our future events very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.